Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Welcome to the School of Art and Design here on our Paddington campus at University of New South Wales. It's part of the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture, and I have the great privilege of being the Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture. My name's Claire Annesley. Before we go any further, I would really like to acknowledge that we're meeting tonight on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander guests who are joining this event tonight. The event that we're here for tonight is the third in a series of creative conversations. It's this wonderful collaboration that we have with Vince Frost and the Frost Collective. When I first met Vince, or maybe the second time I met Vince, we had a conversation about what we could do together. And we came up with the idea of the need for some conversations on issues, dialogue around creative some of the challenges and opportunities that are facing creative industries at the moment. We also wanted to create an event or a series of events that build community between students and colleagues and creatives in the city. And I personally also wanted an opportunity to be able to host some guests on our fantastic Paddington campus here in art and design, where so much cool stuff is happening. I think when we met last time, I mentioned that we just recently launched fashion here at Art and Design and a new master's degree in VFX. The exciting news now is that next year, or from next year, our students will be able to study game art, and that's something that I'm very excited about. So this is a thriving campus, and it's wonderful to have you here. The events, the Creative Conversation events, are also hosted by our ADA Innovation Hub, which is a design-led, project-based initiative that, at the very heart of our faculty, focuses on problem solving and curating teams to tackle problems to improve life on Earth, working with industry and community and government partners. So on behalf of the ADA Innovation Hub, I welcome you. So previously in Creative Conversations, we've had the opportunity to listen to Vince chat with experts on the opportunities and challenges that AI poses for creative industries and community. And then in the second conversation, we had this amazing discussion about how to scale a creative business. And were any of you here for those conversations? Amazing. Well, thank you for coming back. If you missed those two conversations, they are on our Innovation Hub website. So you can go back and watch them again. And I really recommend that you do. Tonight, for our third event, our third topic, it's multisensory design. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to hear how our panel work to engage all of our senses to create immersive experience. It's a really exciting approach to design and a challenge to work beyond aesthetic considerations. So we'll have the panel discussion, but we really want to hear your perspectives as well on the topic. You may have questions, you may have your own experience or your views that you'd like to share. So please make sure you share them with us after the panel has had their conversation. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can raise your hand and you'll be given this microphone to ask your question, or you can click on that QR code, and you can submit your question now or throughout the course of the panel. So please get your questions ready for the end of the conversation. Okay. Vince, this is the bit where I hand over to you. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to our host for this evening, Vince Frost. Vince is the founder, CEO, and executive creative director of Frost Collective. He is a globally respected and awarded creative who is endlessly committed to designing a better world. So I'd like you all to welcome Vince and all our panelists. And I thank you, Vince, for hosting this conversation and for drawing out the great insights that I know you will draw out of our panelists today. Vince, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. I'm just going to sit down. Here we go. Thank you, Claire, so much for that introduction. And it's really cool to get to number 3. I know when we first started, it was a bit daunting, but really exciting. And, you know, how many people in the room are designers? Yeah, quite a few. Good. I think it was one session we did, there was very few, but we're all human beings. We're all human beings trying to navigate this world, trying to do our best, and we're all studying and doing different things. Us, as Frost Collective as an organization, is really proud to be part of this, Claire and the team at UNSW. Your 75th anniversary this year, which is super cool, and it's great to see a design in innovation happening, and you know, the new edition of fashion and you know, the gaming coming along as well. So I just love being here. It's so creative and exciting, and it takes me back to my days at art school back in England, in Worthing, which is a lot low-key kind of facilities. I think it was a porta cabin, but equally passionate about ideas and design at that stage. And so ultimately these conversations are about sparking ideas and helping kind of get some insights, human beings talking to human beings about things that their expertise and what works for them and why they do it, which is really always such an honor to have these types of conversations. We're, as a business, 30 years old this November, which is a long, long time, and kind of really exciting at the same time. And really cool to see how the world's changed in that period of time. A lot of you probably a hell of a lot younger, but it's interesting to see how technology changes, how the world changes, and how we as designers and people need to evolve and change as well. The conversation is about multidisciplinary design, and they will be recycled, don't worry. We picked this panel of experts that we know and we're working closely with, and you know, and thank you all for your attending and being part of this. People are phenomenal. Every one of you is phenomenal, and every one of you is different and similar in so many ways. And ultimately, when we're designing, I know I studied graphic design back in Sussex in England, and that predominantly was graphic design, which was kind of typography mostly, communication, and in a way very one-dimensional. At the time, I didn't think about the senses. I didn't think about designing for people. I think at the time I was designing for myself and to compete with other students in the classroom. And I think that what I realized over the years, and probably late to the game, of the idea of kind of designing for all the senses is something that we should be doing every day, because we're human beings and we're full sensory beings, and to design for one aspect only is, I believe, not doing our role as good as possible. And so this conversation was really kind of started with asking the question ourselves about how can we as an organization, how can we as designers start to design much more for the full sensory kind of experience, introduce new aspects of that. So we've got experts here to talk about that full-bodied experience. I'm going to, oh, the pictures aren't there, so what are we going to do? Does everybody know where they're going to sit? Okay, cool. We were going to line everybody up in line with their photographs that were up there before, so I'm in the right spot. I don't know what happens now. I'm honored to introduce a brilliant panel and delve into the multidisciplinary sensory design conversation, which is going to be cool. First up is Sibella Court, our expert on the physical spatial experience. And Sibella is one of Australia's most highly decorative creative directors, interior and product designers, an entrepreneur, serial author of, I think, 11 books you've done now, a shop owner. So incredible person, not just a designer, but a full-rounded entrepreneur and an incredible person to share your experience tonight. She designed interiors for some of Sydney's most loved places, including Hotel Palisade, Mr. Wong and Parma & Co., probably a few of you have been to. Her work is deeply rooted in her passion for history as well. And each of her projects evokes an incredible feeling. And that's something that's really, really important, that the feeling is what this is all about. Almost like being transported from the street where you enter into a different world and era. Welcome, Sibella. Craig Andrade is an expert on the design of scents and founder of The Raconteur, an incredible artisanal luxury fragrance brand specializing in botanical fragrances using Australian native plant extracts. I've had the honor, I'm choked up here. I've had the honor to work with Craig to design the identity and packaging for his latest 6 fragrances, which probably be coming up every so often, and the incredible room mists, which are actually part of the Lucky Door Prize tonight. I don't know, has that been explained yet about the bag and the ticket and all that? Maybe not. But there's 8 room mists that the 8 people are going to potentially win from that. Craig's passion, attention to detail, and vision are incredible, and I'm proud to call him a friend and a collaborator. And he was a very successful lawyer before starting The Raconteur in 2019, which is really cool to see him pivot in his career and do something completely different, and also something that he absolutely loves, which is really cool. Which led to massive global attention and appreciation for his incredible brand globally. Welcome, Craig. A local guy, based just next door, Professor John McGhee is an experienced academic leader and research lab director and expert on digital experiences. He holds a practice-based PhD and is a professor of 3D visualization within the Faculty of Arts and Design and Architecture here at UNSW. As the founder and director of the 3DX Lab, which we just had a tour of and it's bloody amazing, a pioneering and world-leading multidisciplinary immersive futures research lab, John leverages cutting-edge creative technologies to conduct art-led computer visualization research. His work explores novel applications of 3D visualization using creative technologies, technological approaches, including 3D computer animation, VFX, 3D volumetric video, and XR. Welcome, John. So basically, we've got a bunch of questions. As Claire mentioned too, there's questions that the audience is going to be giving. So I think there's like 5 questions towards the end. We'll kind of stop 15 minutes before the end. And I think ideally we want to finish at 7:30. I think that's the aim here. And there'll be drinks and food outside, which will be really nice, and continue the conversation and the dialogue as well. I'm going to start with Sibella. Cool. Uh-oh, she grabbed the mic. That's good, that's good. Sibella, stepping into one of your interiors or your shops is like being transported into another era or world. You were on my podcast recently, and I love the fact that you are passionate about and studied history, and that made total sense in that conversation, how you kind of work. Tell us a bit about the amount of historical research that goes into a Sibella Court project.
Okay, am I on? Yeah. Yes, I do have a history degree from Sydney University, and it is an absolute passion of mine. I didn't realise it would be such an enormous part of my design process, and it has become it's the first stop of any project. I start with history. I am very dear friends with the curators and librarians at the Caroline Simpson Library, which is in the Mint, which is our incredible library and resource. If you haven't been there, you must go. It includes houses in its collection, amongst many other things. And I will call them. I might use something as an example, because I think that's easier. So say for something like Mr. Wong, which some of you might know, it's in a beautiful old building that has a deep history in colonial Sydney. And I was able to look up the old surveyor's maps from the 1800s of what that was used for at one time. So it was a warehouse The owner wanted it to be a Chinese restaurant, and I was able to weave in, I deep dived into sort of the history of the area and took what I needed to create that space and the story around it. I do like my interiors to be like walking into a storybook. You might not know all of the story, but you can feel it. So something like that, I started with the surveyor's maps, worked out where the warehouses were, and there was a lot of trade around that time. So then I throw in a bit of make-believe, like the Chinese part. There were a lot of Chinese immigrants around that time. Within that area, the rocks had many, many, many different cultural backgrounds, including Chinese. And so I started the story of the import-export at the time, but it did have the history of the warehouse in there. So it became a tea import-export, which then led to it. So when you're walking through Mr. Wong, you can see all those references, whether it's the elevator doors, which I have done as packaging, tea packaging. There's a beautiful mirror as you walk up the stairs, and then everything relating to it comes back to that storyline of tea import-export.
When you're designing that space, do you think, does interior designer think differently to a graphic designer, say, that are you thinking about the full sensory experience?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always think of it as full at the end product. And then so from the beginning of the design, every single thing that could be touched or seen or felt, or how you sit at a table, everything is considered of how someone will experience the space. So the tactility, how it smells, how it sounds, how sound reflects off surfaces, how they're absorbed, how you could brush up against something, how you can lock a door in a bathroom, how you walk past a visual aspect into a working kitchen. Every single last detail is absolutely considered about how a person will experience it, not how it will look in a photograph.
How do you know when it's right?
Well,
the success of the restaurant.
That's the success of a restaurant. I'm not sure. I'm quite good at stopping because there's so many ideas. You can use them on the next project.
Yeah. Craig, we've been friends for a few years. At least I like to think we're friends. We co-created on a candle that we did, which had 3 layers. I know it was a balmy idea, 3 layers which kind of illustrated kind of favorite film, music, and poetry, and taking people on a scented journey, which was really, really exciting and fun to be part of. How critical is scent in the identity of a place or experience of a brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I left a career in law where we valued worth based on what every single word meant, and pivoted to something where we value everything based on what is invisible and can't be seen. So it's been this beautiful pivot from where meaning and value is either based on billable hours or based on literally every word and its meaning, to this great invisible form of communication. And I think every single place has a sound profile, maybe silent, it's still a profile. It has a scent profile, maybe perceptible or not perceptible, but there are molecules going on around us right now. And to live is to breathe, and therefore is to smell. So the mere act of living requires us to breathe in and to breathe out. So as a primary function of who we are as human beings, this is deeply primal, this is fundamental to life. And I found that for me personally, I was obviously tapping into a deep personal interest in this field, but the more I looked at the landscape, both literally and of course figuratively, in terms of what people are doing, how they're telling their story, how brands tell their story, how hotels tell their story, how any business tells its story, I kept seeing this gap. The gap being that we're not paying enough attention to part of this primary aspect of who we are as human beings. And then of course when COVID hit and many people lost their sense of smell, the deeper realization, of course, is that taste is about 80% smell. And so if you understand that connection, then when you lose your sense of smell and you can't taste your food, you're also realizing, well, this is way bigger than I thought it was, and it's way more important than I thought it was. And so that was a really interesting time in history for us to appreciate a sense which was probably the forgotten sense, because we're so driven by visuals these days. And so for me, the answer to your question is basically, it's fundamental, I think, to every place, to every business, to at least ask the question, is there room for scent in the way we tell our story? At least ask the question. And I think generally, in my line of work, the answer will be yes. So
It's really interesting, and that's a great answer. It's really interesting when you look at the tradition of perfume. Probably Chanel No. 5 is like a iconic perfume, and a lot of fashion brands have created over the years. You know, the perfume is a big part of their brand. At the time, they were the only ones that probably could afford to do it because the cost was so huge. Now you see the trend is beginning to happen where their exploration around scent and scent branding, etc., is really exciting potential. And you look at that and you go, is there room for another scent? Like, you keep coming up with all these new ones all the time. It's like,
sure.
Is it endless?
Sure. I mean, well, I'll give you an example. I think it's nice to talk in examples, as Sibella did. I think, for example, I was in the Barossa trying to design a scent for the Barossa. So it was a project of mine, love going to wine regions, and which is all part of work, of course. And I was in the Barossa, and I was sitting there, having a few glasses of wine at these lovely wineries, and every time I'd look down at my table, a few glasses, I'd look up and there'd be a church. And I go to the next winery and I have another few glasses of wine, enjoying this, and I'd look up and there'd be another church. And I guess I sort of got to this point where there were just these constant symbols of religion wherever I went, and I was drinking. And I sort of got to the stage where I sort of it became so obvious eventually that the scent of the Barossa wasn't about the botanicals that I was driving past and smelling, it was about guilt. And so that was my own experience. And so I sort of thought, well, hang on, let's just flip this on its head and let's look at all the religions that I'm seeing in this region and look at what's going on here. And then let's go wider and look more broadly at religions around the world and look at the use of oils and beautiful scented liquids in ceremony, in worship, and in how religions operate. And then let's turn it on its head and let's take these beautiful elements and then let's create a fragrance called Religious Guilt Spritz, where we can get rid of the guilt. And so that whole idea just came by sort of sitting in a region, really trying to focus over here, which is the fairly linear, literal path, and then realizing the answer is completely there and has nothing to do with what I otherwise thought would be the case. So I guess, sort of just rounding that out, my sense and my process does involve research, but often you start down a fairly obvious path. Like any project, there are the obvious clues for what something should be, but then you get to a deeper level of work and and detail and thoroughness, and then often the clues for great work, I think, which is conceptually strong, comes at the end of all that hard work.
I guess you're looking for a deeper story. And it's a bit like Sibella talks about her restaurant, the research that goes behind that to find an authentic story that adds that feeling and connection as well.
Yeah, I think, because the question was ultimately, is there room for another scent? And I think the answer is, provided you're doing original work that's highly creative, that is deeply thoughtful, that is sensitive and respectful, but yet is able to thread a needle that is strong, I feel like whatever your discipline is, that's the answer to more scent, more buildings, more interiors, more whatever it is, more computer programs that are going to make more computer games. Ultimately, it's the power of original thinking and strong conceptual underpinning that I think drives the cohesion that you get ultimately, which is to an emotional experience, right? A feeling. That's how it all ties together.
And John, we had a look at the lab just now, and it's super cool. And it's interesting. It's kind of obviously it's digital, virtual, not real. And these guys are working in the real space and real physical interaction. Not that yours isn't real physical interaction, because it is. But how can immersive digital experiences benefit human beings without feeling like another overstimulated interaction?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think it does come back to what Craig was saying and Sibella was saying, that It's about story and about compelling worlds. I mean, whether you're in the physical or you're purely in digital, I mean, the worlds we build, we have to build everything from scratch. And then often many of the content that we make is displayed on a headset or a screen array. And so we kind of fabricate these synthetic digital spaces. And they're quite bland and vanilla initially, and then you have to bring an overlay human experience on them to tell a story. I mean, an example that I can maybe give that would help make that clearer, we work closely with St Vinny's just across the road at Darlinghurst, the hospital, looking at how do you explain how stroke works to a patient that maybe has had a stroke? How do you explain it? We can explain it in words. We can maybe draw something on a piece of paper if you're a clinician, and you can try and explain it with a scan even. But what we found is that wasn't enough, and they came to us and then, how could we tell that story with some of these digital technologies where you can make everything, you can make the world, and then you can put them in a headset and they can see anything. And so to make it compelling, we brought in their data. So it was their data they were looking at, not a generic piece of animation, but something that was relevant to them. And then we also looked at how other people tell stories about the body, and so we looked at Fantastic Voyage, which is a terrible film, by the way, and it's very much through the male lens if you look at it academically, but it sort of flips the paradigm of how we explore the body. You're in a spaceship, you're moving around the body, you're exploring the space in a completely different way from the inside out rather than from the outside in. And so we took that paradigm of story and we put it in that synthetic space. So in answer to your question, there is a lot of noise and there's a lot of like saturation in digital tools, but if you make a story that's compelling and personal, that will go through the noise, it will cut through everything and become much more relevant to the user. And that's what we've done. But it does sort of talk to what we said earlier about making stories that are relevant and personal. And also, I would say as well, in the digital space, there is the human. We are there. It's not completely synthetic. We are there. We are the wetware that interacts with the hardware. But yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm just thinking also around that kind of illusion of reality too, isn't it? You're kind of tricking the senses to thinking that it's real.
Yes, it's true. I mean, I think so much of entertainment's illusion though, right? Everything from cinema to performance, it's an amplification of reality. And I think that's a blessing and a curse. I think that amplification and that illusion takes us places in our dreams, right? It takes us places we really want to go, not places that are the humdrum of reality. And I think we can do that in physical spaces. We can build these dreams or these other amplified places. Movie makers do it. And so I think what we do is a similar thing. We design these compelling spaces, physical or virtual.
Do you work much in that space where you're kind of designing calmness or anticipation or inquisitiveness, or like deliberately focusing on your mood?
Yeah, I think the way we've done that in the past with some of our digital experiences, especially in virtual realities, we make them very much explorative. You're not forced to go in a certain place. You explore them and you find them at your own speed. And these interactive technologies allow that. And you can move around and you can hang out in your aorta for like an hour if you want. And I did once, and that sounds really nuts, but it was actually quite beautiful. I was at this tiny scale, and it was almost cathedral-like. Wow. It was enormous. The aortic arch was like a cathedral, and these thousands of red blood cells passing over my head. And that's quite different from how the medical gaze presents our bodies, right? Yeah. It presents it as this visceral butcher shop or this piece of space that's owned by the medical profession. But I brought it back to the awe of the body rather than the place that you might want to go on holiday even, right? It could be the Fantastic Voyage. You go there on a trip around your own body, which sounds really odd, but if it's compelling and it's awe-inspiring and you're learning on the way, it could be a place you want to go, right? You go to Trailfinders and book your trip down the aorta.
When you showed us the display earlier, there was like it was kind of cancer. Can I say what it is or not? I can't say. Can I say what we just saw?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, so I don't even know what it was. So maybe you should explain. but it was in someone's body. It was cancer cells. But you had music. I was interested because you had some music in the background, which really made me feel something different than like that. That music clearly is an important part of that experience.
Oh yeah, we drew from the cinematic. It was basically a human cell, and it was all the interactions. We tried to create a place that was, if we could we simulate every single interaction that happens on a cell? We almost got there, and could we drive it from data that we'd got from the science team? That was the objective, but we wanted to make it a place that was like a landscape. So when you're in that space, you can actually see a horizon line, which doesn't exist on a human cell, by the way. There's no horizon line. There's no sunset or moon. Moonrise, it's very much like pea soup. But to make humans interact with it and explore it and maybe learn in it, we had to make it something that was physically recognizable. So we did add sound, we'd add vision, and sometimes we even bring in haptics as well, where the controller vibrates. So when you're moving through an environment, you get that haptic feel, which is just through the controller, right? You're not driving over bumps and lumps, but it just gives you that sensation that you might be.
We've got my wonderful team here. There's a few guys from our environments team here who have been working over the last probably 5 or 6 years on hospitals. A lot of investment. The government's invested a lot in hospitals, which is amazing for all of us. It's interesting talking to the guys every time we work on such a project is around designing for people in all types of situations. You could be about to give birth. You could be just someone has passed away, you could be in a hurry, you could be, you can design all these different experiences and cater for those experiences, be mindful of that. Sibella, when you're working in your restaurants and places, how do you design for all those, not those specific scenarios, but, someone might be going there to a special night for getting engaged or birthday or a whole bunch of guys out in the town. Like, how do you design for all those different scenarios? Do you imagine those?
No, but, well,
that wasn't a question, I just made that up.
Yeah, it was a good one. I really like the conversation about illusion and awe too, because the spaces that I like to create are an illusion. They are, you're out of your own kitchen, and you're going somewhere for an experience, and I want it to be as immersive as possible. And if you take an idea home, I'm even happier, whether it be a tactile idea of how a sofa looks or upholstery or a display or the food or the soundscape, whether that's music or just the ambient sound or, the cutlery, whatever it happens to be. But that illusion is so important, and to transport whoever's there, experience, celebrating or having a nightly dinner or whatever they're doing, for them to be able to forget and just enjoy that evening is what's most important. And that's what I strive for.
And that's
all the
wonderful,
time.
that you're almost designing joy and happiness in that.
Yeah, and it's through all the layering, I think, as well, and whether it's the different zoning, so people can choose, whether it be there might be more on show, it might have more lively, but there's always a place to have a quiet time as well. Like, all my spaces have different zones, and they're all quite different for whatever you want to celebrate.
Are you ever surprised by the feedback? Do you ever have situations, the feedback after it's opened, or, like a lot of the places you've designed have been the same for a long time now, which obviously shows that they're
Still
people
going
love
strong.
them. Yeah.
I mean, I like to design for longevity, not for something to be turned over in 5 years.
Yeah. So the idea that, I guess it comes back to the historical aspect of it and the story.
Yeah. Okay,
great. On to the next question, Craig. Well, we talked about that a little bit. Your fragrances are an invisible form of communication, apart from the beautiful packaging. But we won't talk about that. Talk about how you go about designing a scent, because it's mind-boggling. I see you in your leather apron and glasses on and looking very like a professor. What goes into it?
Well, I think there's a couple up there which are about places. But if we're talking about stories that involve place, and that is typically what I do. Some are conceptual, so I've got a couple in the range which are conceptual. But the ones that are place-based, let's talk about those because they're easy to describe. They will involve site visits and field exploration. I did a collab with a beautiful resort or hotel called Capella on Lord Howe Island, owned by the Bailey family, and what was remarkable about that, of course, is I had to go there for work. And I encourage you to all have work in your practice which involves sites that are not where you live. So that was insane, because Lord Howe Island, if I don't know who's been there, if anyone in the room been there, yeah, you'd know how special that place is. It's a World Heritage Site, pristine marine environment, extraordinary landscape, plant species that are endemic to the island, as well as various critters, insects, bugs, things that swim, things that probably could eat you. But it's really a beautiful microcosm of this planet. It's almost like David Attenborough's favourite place to go on holiday would probably be that place. And I got there and was just overwhelmed with the beauty of the place, of course. And then you sort of start to tap into all these layers of what's going on, and it is so unique to that environment. And spent some time with one of the local professors and botanists on the island who knows more about what's going on than David Attenborough. And through his eyes got to walk with him and see the lens of these botanicals, and really the story of the land just starts to speak back to you if you listen to it, is my experience. And so I'm really there as an observer. And I'm there taking a lot of field notes. Don't ever go on a bushwalk with me, because I stop and smell and crush leaves. And I mean, every 5 meters I'm doing this. So, you know, I'll see you back at the camp, basically. But I'm one of those people who just, when I'm in those sort of environments, I am deeply immersed in obviously the sound, the sights. But until you've stopped and crushed a leaf, you don't really know what's going on. And, you know, we discovered through, you know, the research that he's done, we had many plant species on the island which were endemic to the island that had a scent profile which was very similar to some of the things that we would know from the mainland or around the world. And so that's where the story starts to take life and starts to take shape. And so the answer to your question is all site-related work is deeply immersive, loads of field notes, loads of research, then taking that data back, analysing the scent profile of what I've just experienced, and then looking at whether we can get an extract from those plants or not, and is there a viable extract or not, and if there isn't, can we create an accord which will mimic that? So we'll do a lot of lab tests, we'll send materials away for analysis. We have to look at toxicity. We have to look at whether these things have in fact been used before in perfumery. And so the work is, in that sense, very exciting and pioneering. And sometimes we can't use things because the levels of toxicity are too high for the skin, but yet they smell beautiful in nature. And so the original perfumer was, of course, Mother Nature. And so my job is to really pay attention to what is being told back to me. And that's the starting point of that conversation.
I'm just trying to think about, we had a conversation on the podcast a little while ago, and you were talking about you did some course in Paris or something, and the lady that was teaching you was unaware that there was more than one scent out of Australia. Was it this? That was quite alarming, but exciting too, because obviously you came back and now you've made that your focus, all the Australian botanics.
Yeah, I mean, this was, well, to get from a pivot from law to perfumery, that is 180 degrees. You don't do that without having a really good midlife crisis going, what the hell am I doing? And am I going to be doing this for the rest of my life? So a lot of therapy later, and a candle making class where I sort of added the scent. And as I was breathing it in, I remember just having this out-of-body experience with this profound effect on my physiology, where I'd come from this hyper-stressful law firm environment and suddenly realized scent had the ability to calm, to ground, to center me. And I could not understand what was going on, and I did not understand the body's physiology and how scent works and how molecules are processed through the frontal cortex of the brain and blah, blah, blah. So basically did this deep dive, was fascinated, and then went to France to the Grasse Institute to learn perfumery. And I was sort of moonlighting while I was a partner in a law firm, sort of disappearing for a couple of months on a holiday, while I was taking sabbatical in Europe, really sort of honing my skills as a perfumer. And we got to this moment in class, and my teacher ran the Chanel perfume lab for 20 years. And we're sort of talking about what comes from where. And we got to Australia, and she said, I won't do the French accent, but she said, they've got sandalwood and Baronia. And without thinking, I just sort of put my hand up and thought, hang on, I have to defend Australia and the United Nations of ingredients here. And she said, yes. And I said, ma'am, we've got like a few more. And she said, like what? And so I just started rattling off various botanicals. And I was like, well, there's Fregonia, of course there's Baronia, but you've got the myrtle family, we've got Buddha wood, the cypresses. And I started just rattling all this stuff off, and she said, that's enough. So I was like, sure. Sat down, didn't want to...
I'm about to say the same thing.
Don't want to show it. But the important point about this story, why that moment was big, was because it was the moment for me. She called me up afterwards and said, look, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I know nothing about what you just spoke about. I said, okay. And she said, well, you need to take that story to the world, because we don't know what you just said. And that was the light bulb moment for me about my career. That was the idea. And that was sort of when I got back to Australia going, right, I'm quitting my job, I'm doing this is what I'm going to do. And I guess the fundamental part about storytelling and scent and why this is so fundamental is in Australia we have amazing materials. We just come from a history where we haven't really celebrated our backyard and those materials, and we don't have a perfume industry that's 200 years old. So this is new in that sense. Yeah. And we're trying to encourage Australians to get in love and in touch with our backyard. So, end of sermon.
Beautiful, beautiful. No, I love it hearing people talk about their passion and especially a career shift like that. Into something that they absolutely love, and that whole awakening of all the senses in embracing that and living it 100%. John, what digital experiences, what can digital experiences do that physical experiences can't?
It's an interesting question. I just want to make a statement. The real world is really good. It's very good.
I love it. Yeah.
It's amazing, in fact. Mm-hmm. Everything we take for granted, the physics, the emotion, and the touch, all our experiences of the real world, digitally doesn't even come close. Like, it doesn't. It's trying, and we're trying to use it to augment this experience we call being a human. But I think we've got a bit to go yet. I think the thing that digital can do, which I think it's starting to do well, is connect us. Like virtual experiences or the ability to be present with someone else somewhere else in the world through a digital immersive system can be done. We can't do that physically without jumping on a plane, in my case, for like 30 hours and getting jet lag and arriving. And now we have FaceTime, we have technologies that bring us closer together, and they will evolve. And things like holograms and volumetric video and Apple and NVIDIA and these tech companies are trying to push these techs, among other things, but they're trying to push these technologies to the point where we start to address some of those connective human needs. But I still think we've got a long way to go to match this. But the Matrix is not coming anytime soon.
Oh, really? It feels like it with what Elon Musk is doing, etc. Like this virtual world that we're moving into.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think what we're having is amplification and augmentation of our experience. It's places we can go for short periods of time, or for exposure, or amplifying for education, for learning, for therapeutic immersion, for certain situations where we can go somewhere that we couldn't possibly go physically. We can go virtually. And we can connect to other humans in that experience. And the technology is fooling our senses to think we're actually there. The illusion is very, very well done now, but it's still not this. But it's getting close. But I still think augmentation of reality is really where it's at. And we're looking at XR at the moment with a lot of XR experiences whereby we can use the virtual world to build the holographic version of an experience. An example could be, there's moments in our lives that we want to go back and relive, and we do it through photography and video, right? We take a photograph of our kid taking its first step, or playing soccer, or that holiday to Capri, as Craig mentioned as his example. We go places and then we want to go back. So we have a photograph of it, or we have a video we've captured on our phone because we want to replay that experience. I think that replaying and recapturing is a really, really interesting area. And we're trying to develop some approaches to that whereby you can bring that back and you can walk around and be in that place again and again and again to see it again and make us feel more human and stimulate memories in all the senses, fully immersive, and also introducing things like smell on top of that.
Does it have soundscape?
Potentially, yes. You could capture the soundscape in 3 dimensions of an experience and play it back. The trouble is that it's not live often. It's a captured, canned experience. So you're going back to somewhere you've been. Everyone's a zombie. They can't see you, but you can see them, and you can see yourself potentially. But you can only play it back as if you're just a voyeur in that experience. But we think with AI that might change, and those things can look back at you. But I think that would be very, very scary if someone was to look back at you from an experience that you had in the past. Wow. And I think, again, there's ethical implications, and there's a whole load of other things that go along with these amplifications and extended realities. But I'll go back to the point, this world is amazing. We mustn't take it for granted. I think these digital texts just augment, for me.
Sibella, what's the recipe for a perfect place for you?
Easy question.
Is it? Yeah.
Number 7. The perfect place. For a guest, not for me, because I don't design places for me, unless it's my own home.
Okay.
But for a guest, it's to tick all the sensory boxes, whether it's, as you walk in, to feel transported, to have an emotion that you don't even have to really clue into what it is, but you already feel comfortable, you want to be there, you're invited in. Then you sit down, food, the cutlery's right, the flowers that you've walked into, it all part of the story that set the scene as well. The scene is set, and then the food, the drinks, obviously good company. All of these things add to it. It can never be one thing that makes it perfect. It's so many layers. It's going to the bathroom and having fantastic soundscape in there. I've mentioned before, there was a restaurant I went to in Edinburgh, and I walked down and went to the bathroom, and I'd met the owner. It just opened, and there was the most incredible soundscape. And I went up and I said, "What is that?" And she said, "It's my favourite wine being made."
Wow.
I was like, "Oh, I love." I never forget it. That was 15 years ago, and I never forgot that experience. And I collect soundscape now all the time. Collecting on my memo on my iPhone. I just absolutely love it. But it's all of the things. It's even, the soap that you pump on that's, considered in a space. So every single sense is absolutely captured and considered and thoughtful, and that's the perfect space.
And lighting? How do you approach lighting?
I spend hours on lighting. Firstly, I don't hire a lighting designer.
Okay.
That's key. They overdo it. About zoning. All about zoning for me. I have strong aversion to downlights. They make everyone look really bad.
Mm-hmm. I look terrible right now.
So the lighting, I spend a lot of time on lighting. I usually have 3 or 4 layers of lighting that I work with.
Do you think,
probably 4?
Do you think the general public are aware of how much you're manipulating them, or how much
nurturing them?
Nurturing them. Yeah.
No, they don't know. There's a lot of subconscious, both wayfinding and zoning and comforting and a lot of the decision making when you're designing. That is always been thought of how people move through space subconsciously and are directed and nurtured. Yeah, absolutely. But the lighting, that's such a big part of it for me. Huge part.
Huge part. Craig, you got stores just up the road here in William Street and in Hobart, which you designed to tap into all the 5 senses. That's perfect. Can you talk a bit about that your approach to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it echoes exactly what Sibella's just said. I mean, I probably am a frustrated interior designer and architect at the same time. And I obsess about the same details that you've just mentioned as well. Probably I am, some borderline personality of great challenge, I reckon. But it's because I obsess. I think these are important things. I think how we process the world, how we see space, how we interact, all these details for me matter. I love them. I love them. And I think when we think about the full human being and who we are, I guess this was part of my first aid kit during COVID when we were all isolated, which was to say every single day I considered all 5 senses and what I was going to do to nurture. And I guess as part of self-care, you go, well, what am I doing today in terms of food? What am I doing today in terms of sound? Where am I going to go for a walk? If I can't walk too far, what's it going to be about? How am I connecting with all 5 of these senses? And so I just take that principle to my spaces. And I think if you're walking into my store, I do want it to be warm and nurturing. I do want it to be a very comfortable space that you immediately feel there's something going on here. This is very considered. I thought this was just a fragrance shop or a perfume store, but there's more. So there is visual art. There's, of course, scent. Soundscaping, so working with an artist to create different soundscapes based on the locations where we make scent from. So the stories of the scent. What is that sound? What is that place about? Taste, working with a tea company to design teas which link to the botanicals we use in perfumery. So there's a taste element. And touch. Touch is tactile, so working with a group of women in Central Australia, the Jumpy Desert Weavers, we sell their fibre art, their baskets. All of these connections take you back to the land. They all take you back to place. They all take you back to an element which connects you to the Australian landscape. So those are the 5.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think what you touched upon earlier, just around that kind of, we keep talking about COVID, it's made such a big impact on our lives. And I think I can relate to what you just said about that time with nature, that time to kind of reacquaint yourself with slowing down, getting regrounded or grounding. It's something that really taught me a lot around, it really opened my eyes and ears and nose, etc., to the senses and to nature. And I think in our busy, hectic worlds, we get so consumed by the pace and the busyness of making a living and just life, etc., that kind of slowing down or being aware of what's around us and the beauty and things that actually aren't beautiful. The effect that things that aren't great have on us and our feelings and our well-being, etc., is really important to be aware of, to kind of navigate the world, to actually continue to look after yourself, in terms of being aware of what makes you feel good, what makes you feel happy, what makes you feel calm, what makes you feel fulfilled, whether it's a career, whether it's a relationship, whether it's light, whether it's air, whether it's scent, etc. That kind of getting to know yourself as a sensory being, I think is really, really important, because we kind of just take it all for granted, I think, that we're living things.
Well, I think, you're designing a better life for yourself, I think has to involve all 5 of those elements, because that's just fundamental to being a human being, right? Fully engaged on all 5 levels. So I think there's designing your own life, but designing for others. I think, to me, it's hard to give someone something you don't have. It's hard to contribute authentically when you don't have the basis for the contribution. So I guess I do spend a lot of time thinking about all 5 of those elements in my own life, in my own practice. And when I'm making a scent, I guess I do try and think about, well, how is this going to affect someone else's life? There's hopefully a great story here, a funny concept, something interesting, or a serious concept, but something with meaning, something with purpose, that's considered. It flows through the visual packaging. We put a soundtrack with every product we make as well. Tea, we don't sell tea with every product, but tea in our spaces for sure. And I guess we just want to encourage everyone to just think about life across all those prisms. And I think that just makes for good living.
John, I think that's really cool what you were talking about. You had some people come from Vinny's, sort of wake you up there. He was dozing off. Vinny's across the road to work with people, and actually the idea of walking around your body or visualizing something that there's no way you could visualize that without cutting something open. Like, the idea that transportation into another place and time and experience is phenomenal. Just think the potential of that and what you can do with that. That again, it's an illusional thing. I guess it doesn't have to be illusional if it's a real camera within yourself, but it's exciting kind of to, I'm going to wrap it up in a second. I don't know where I'm going with that, but there's something kind of, I just love that.
Yeah.
Cathedral.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? In the Middle Ages, we went to cathedrals. In the 20th century, we went to cinemas. And now we might go back inside our bodies. But yeah, I think humans many of us crave for these experiences to go to other places. I think, again, I love cinema. I live and breathe going into the cinema, sitting down, and the screen turns on, and you're transported into somewhere else. And these technologies play into that, right? They take us other places, but they could take us to really places that we can explore for long periods of time rather than just a 1.5 hour feature movie. And they're fully immersive, and they come with all the extra caveats around the senses.
I mean, I'm interested in. Sorry, Vince, I'm just going to hijack your question. But I'm interested in what we've been talking about all night, because I think that virtual world and how it can be augmented with other elements. So clearly, we've spoken about sound. The visuals are great, but bringing scent into that experience as well is not only interesting in terms of taking us back into memory. So we spoke about dementia patients and treatments for things like that, but also forward and futuristic. Or if you are going to travel down, the human body, what does that look like? What does that smell like? What does that sound like, cathedral or otherwise?
The other thing as well, I think we always assume, well, many of us do in this area, that it's kind of a binary. You're in this virtual world or you're in the real world. But with the new tech, you can be in both, and there's a bandwidth of how much of that's digital and how much of it's, like real world. So XR is now providing that. Apple are now moving into that space where you put on a headset. Mark Zuckerberg had a pair of glasses on that are almost the same as yours, Vince. They're very similar to your glasses. Are those the glasses? And so he's pushing to cram all this tech into a pair of glasses, whereby you can overlay. So you can play. I always say it's like the real world does stuff really well. Why try and reinvent it in the digital? It's really good, and it's taken millions of years to happen. So use it. But then there's things in the digital space that we can bring on top of that we can do really well too. So fusing these worlds together with these techs, I think, is where it's going to go. It's this fusion and this playing and this bandwidth of how we use it back and forward is really exciting to me. It doesn't have to be fully immersive cathedral versus the real world cathedral. It can be a hybrid of stuff, but it does present ethical questions, because then sometimes it can be hard to know, is that thing I'm looking at, is that real, or is that just something that's been overlaid by my meta? Is that an advert, or is it just like something that's there and you have to take the glasses off and work out? So there's all these questions that might come into play very soon. This isn't sci-fi, this has already been done.
We've got some questions going to come into play now with the audience. Good segue there, thank you. Emma is going to read out some of the questions that have been sent through.
Yeah, thanks, Vince, and
Thanks,
thank
Emma.
you. Great insights. We've had some excellent questions come through the QR code. So while you might be formulating your question you'd like to ask, I might begin with some of the ones that have come through. So where shall we begin? So I think we may have covered a little bit of this about sensory enhancing experiences and the opposite, sensory overload. And do you consider this in your design projects?
Who should that be for?
Oh, let's go to Craig.
Sensory overload. Too much scent is a bad thing. As you know, if you're walking into an elevator and someone is overdressed with scent, horrific.
Well, you attacked me with spray before, and I can't.
That was a
get it
different
out.
message.
Yeah.
No. So.
Yeah, thank you. My eyes are watering.
Yeah. No, I think, everything is about balance, right? So I think there are clearly areas of focus where you want to direct the gaze, the sound, where is the sound coming from? Same thing with scent. We want to direct the focus to certain parts of the structure of something we are composing. And when it's out of balance, you get the dominance of too much of something, whatever the ingredient is. And so balance is definitely important. And then the way people wear and experience scent, back to overload, problematic. So there's a bit of education around that. But overall, even back to space, right? If we're thinking about a great space that's been designed that is incorporating scent into the branding, if it's pumped too high, like an Abercrombie and Fitch store in the 1990s in London, like horrific. You could smell that 3 blocks away. But the reality is they were one of the first brands that really understood the power of scent marketing. So overload, problematic. Balance, great.
Beautiful. And Sibella, you were talking about when to stop.
Well,
Yes,
yeah. I
please.
think that goes back to balance, and even the question you said about being perfect. So it's knowing when to stop and making sure that overload definitely doesn't happen, and that there's always a place for respite and prospect. So there's a place to, if you are sensory, if you get overloaded as well, because everyone has different levels of overload. So having places to go that suits your level of scent and what you can that you can absorb at any time.
And that might lead to a question regarding different kinds of sensory perceptions. So when walking into a space and considering accessibility, inclusivity, physical mobility, lack of senses or heightened senses, would anyone like to talk to the kind of thoughts around inclusivity and designing with senses?
I can probably do that one. Yeah. Every place, I design a lot of hotels, and there is a lot of laws around it as well. So we have experts that help us, with all the compliance. But leaving compliance aside, as I said before, every space that I design, I imagine someone in there. So I'm not designing it for how it just looks, but how it's going to be used. And we are always considering the different kinds of access and even the soundscape leading up to a space, and whether a wheelchair or otherwise, or less than not able-bodied people can get into a space, or how they're going to navigate it at any time. And there's always that allowance. But going back to even like how we sit at a table, or how you view a bar, or how you sit at a bar, and that there's always different levels of seating, or even different surfaces. So even if you're highly sensitive to metals or any kind of thing, there's another choice for you at any point in any of the spaces we design. It's a little harder with hotel rooms sometimes. Yeah,
Yes.
but you're always trying to navigate those sorts of things.
I was going to ask a question too. It's like, I was just thinking that, when you go into a restaurant today, people, the first thing they say is, any allergies?
Yeah.
I didn't never say, those lights, I can't,
I'm
I can't.
often allergic to the lights.
Yeah. But I think it's so important. And again, we should always be designing and creating things for the whole range of people in terms of their kind of abilities and all that. And I think that don't be presumptuous that everybody can feel everything or hear everything or smell everything. Not kind of create cliches that just kind of cliches to fit a category or whatever.
Or not having lack of design where you do have to have compliance. Like that the design cues are throughout, so everyone can delve into and appreciate or love the design. So even though you might have to have handrails, they're still considered and beautiful, not just ticking a box.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to add as well, in terms of virtual reality and XR, it's an area that's been massively neglected, and it's in terms of accessibility, particularly because VR depends hugely on vision. And so it's basically a mobile phone screen right next to your eye. So if you've got any impaired vision, it's going to be very difficult for you to run the headset properly. But it is a hot topic in research at the moment within the academic community, looking at more accessibility around virtual reality. So if there's any PhD candidates or anyone interested in doing a PhD in that at UNSW, please drop me an email, because I think that's an area that we really want to get more research into, how we widen the gamut and bring in other groups to develop content for these systems, whether it be using audio, whether it be using other senses to provide immersion.
Thank you all. We are reaching the end of the conversation, and I know you all have excellent questions, but we can continue outside amongst drinks and canapes. Yes, and I'm going to pass to Claire.
Thank you very much, Emma. Vince, do you wrap up at the end, or do we
No,
just go for
you
drinks?
can wrap up. I think
I'm
you're
not-
standing.
I'm not going to wrap up. I'm just going to
Oh.
say thank you to the panellists. It's been so fantastic to hear those amazing perspectives and so many different perspectives on design. But what I want to say at the end is, Vince, you mentioned a little bit at the start about your own career and your start in East Sussex, which is where we both came from, and also that your own practice is celebrating 30 years this year. But I just wanted to say congratulations as well on the fact that you won the 2024 Australian Design Prize. And
Thank
just
you.
take a moment for us to say congratulations.
Oh,
And-
that's so sweet.
And now we can all have a drink and toast that and celebrate that as well. Thank you, everybody, so much.